So welcome to the next, the June webinar for the SFMI. So many of you might have met me before, but I am Sophie Adams. I am a sustainability consultant at Aclara Advisory in the SFMI. And this is our next Bitesize webinar, which is our kind of monthly webinar series to drive a kind of provide an educational view on how to embed sustainability into different areas of the facilities management sector. So just a quick overview of the SFMI. Again, many of you might be quite familiar with this already. So the purpose of the SFMI is to embed sustainability into the management and operations of the FM sector. Our mission is to just do that through our 4 pillars. So we've got our first pillar is all around kind of understanding sustainability and providing the FM with kind of aspiration and vision of how they can become sustainable leaders within the industry. We do this through our roadmap, which is our kind of annual auditing process, in which we can identify areas of best practice within the industry and also highlight areas for improvements kind of moving forwards. We also like to upskill the sector as well, so working with FMs to drive sustainability, and that kind of includes things like our Bitesize webinar series, of which we're hosting today, and also celebrating the successes within the industry and highlighting excellence as well. So today we're looking at the topic of embedding sustainability through in FM through governance and disclosure. So our speaker today is Lewis Chenery from Bouygues Energy Services. He's got over 10 years of experience within the industry, within the built environment, and is head of their environmental sustainability team and embedding sustainability within their organisation. So if I just hand over to Lewis now, then he can carry on with his presentation, and then right at the end we'll have an opportunity for any questions that people have got. As we go, you can use the Q&A function to submit any of your questions as you go. So if you can use the Q&A function rather than the chat box, then that would be preferable, if that's okay.
Yeah, so thanks for the introduction, Sophie, and for the invitation as well. So yeah, as Sophie mentioned, I'm Lewis Chenery. I'm recently been appointed as Head of Environment and Sustainability for Bouygues Energy Services. And a bit of a disclaimer, I've got the terrible case of hay fever today, so I've got a bit of a tickly throat. So I might draw for the water on separate occasions. But yeah, as Sophie mentioned, today's topic is on driving sustainability within facilities management via the mechanisms of governance and disclosure. So I'll be touching on each of those topics kind of individually, looking at the drivers and challenges, and covering some of the kind of measures and good practice that we've implemented to develop both elements. And then at the end, just tying them up together and hopefully a bit of Q&A. Oh, sorry, I can't change my screen. 1 second. Okay, so just for those who don't know who Bouygues Energy and Services are, we're part of the wider Bouygues group, which is probably best known for being a construction company. We're present in over 20 countries, and in the UK, we've got 3 main sectors of activities. So that's firstly infrastructure, so smart motorways and street lighting. So installing LED lights, for example. We've got quite a large and growing energy division, so delivering solar farms and things like district heat networks, mainly for local authorities at the moment, but some private clients as well. And then finally, and what we're focusing on today, is facilities management. So we've currently got about 45 contracts, and that's a mixture of public and private sector, ranging from large hospitals and educational, such as universities, but also private sector clients who are sustainability focused, such as the Body Shop. And on the screen at the moment, there's just a selection of some of the different projects that we've either built or are currently maintaining. So I'll dive straight into the topic. So I'll start with governance and what is it and why does it matter? So in a nutshell, sustainable governance is essentially the driving force that embeds sustainability within businesses. It's generally the keystone in setting and managing objectives or KPIs, oversees reporting, strengthens and builds relationships with stakeholders. So to kind of summarize in a sentence, it ensures the overall accountability of a kind of business or organization. There are many ESG frameworks that define the pillar differently, but the governance pillar tends to include some of the key areas bullet pointed on the screen now. So looking at how a business manages and reviews risks, how committed the board are to the overall sustainability agenda, whether that's internally or externally. What frameworks the business aligns to? Is it something like the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, or do they have their own internal strategies? How transparent a business is and how they communicate environmental impacts and performance. So that will feed into the second part of the webinar, and then also diversity within the business as well. So looking at senior management level and in particular the board. So onto the kind of drivers and challenges, and it's probably at this point, before going any further, absolutely worth labouring the point that the three components of ESG are completely interrelated and require a methodology to promote the benefits and the kind of synergies between them all. Environmental and social concerns are, generally interconnected, and good corporate governance is the structure that builds them and glues them together and drives them forward. Investors are championing governance practices as well in setting purpose, value and strategies. And I could suggest that's probably also because of the increasing kind of risk within the current market as well, whether that's financial risks, reputational risks, but also the increasing kind of area and evolving area of regulatory and legislative landscape as well. So in the past few years, we've seen several supporting mechanisms to be introduced in the UK from the SECR, which is the Streamlined Energy and Carbon Reporting Mechanism, and also things like the Public Procurement Notice 06/21, which essentially made sure that any private company with government contracts over £5 million were aligned to government strategy and were accountable in the sense that they had to publish them online. Moving over to the challenges, and it's the biggest challenge with governance, I think, is measuring governance. It's slightly more subjective and is qualitative in its nature. Those actually working actively within FM will know that we naturally fragmented business structures, both physically and geographically, meaning that it can be a challenge to govern the sustainability agenda down into the FM contracts. And then finally, despite an increase in kind of ESG type reporting in recent years, for instance, where it's absolutely boomed, many business leaders and kind of organizations are unclear about how to take action around governance, especially for perhaps an SME or a smaller business that doesn't have the resources and structure to be able to do that effectively, at least on paper. So onto what we've done and some of the measures that we've put in place around governance in Bouygues over the past few years. And I apologize, this is a slightly busy slide, but one of the main things that we've done is had a department restructure and changed our position within the business. So a good example of this is the integration of our procurement and sustainability departments. So a lot of our risk, and it will be the same for many of the people on the call, and impacts falls within the supply chain. So I take carbon, for example, over 85% of our emissions lies within the procured goods and services bracket. So this seems like an obvious move to kind of address that and strategize that. So I'm not sure if people will know, but some people may be familiar with my boss, Amel Mastari, who also moved into the position of Procurement and Sustainable Development Director. So pushing that down into the supply chain, essentially. We've integrated sustainability topics into the corporate risk register too. So considering things like supply chain disruption from climate change and infrastructure damage. We've developed sustainability focused business strategies. So we've got a Together Further strategy that looks at people, planet and client. All of our staff have contributing towards a climate strategy in their appraisals. So it's that health and safety approach, everyone's responsible for it. We've created a senior leadership sustainability committee with a supporting sustainability panel, and within the business now I think there's over 100 members within that group, and also committed to frameworks such as, again, I mentioned earlier, UN SDGs, and kind of supporting mechanisms such as science-based targets. Leadership as well, which I mentioned at the start, we've joined the 30% club. So that's aiming to achieve a minimum of 30% representation, or representation from underrepresented demographics on our board. So that's supported again by accountability element about publishing annual D&I reports. For the FM specific bit, down from the corporate level, we've got our internal auditing process. So Sophie and Chris will be familiar with our EcoSite certification program, which is the backbone of our kind of ISO 14001, but also looks at how we manage energy, how we prevent pollution, how we mandate delivering social value within our business. And then, of course, the Sfmi assessment, which we do annually as well, which is assessed under the kind of 23 ESG elements as well. We've got a employee-led green network too. So that's their job, is to kind of challenge the business and encourage change in policy, and integrating into client-side FM networks as well. So just an overview of how it works in action then. So this is the kind of structure of it. So as I mentioned, we've got at the top of it, we've got our Together Further strategy, which mandates our net zero targets, for example. We've got our climate change senior leadership group, reviewing and monitoring those KPIs and targets on a monthly basis. The Green Network, who I mentioned, our operational sustainability panel. But we've also got our directors actively supporting the agenda. So if we look at the two photos on the right of the screen at the moment, the bottom image is Glyn Newby. So he's our operations director and one of the board members, delivering a climate change toolbox talk last week. And the other image is Simon Heyman, who's one of our regional directors, delivering a toolbox talk at one of our hospitals. Now, as I mentioned on the previous slide as well, we try our best to integrate into our FM client sustainability networks as well, because I think when you make those two connections, it really does drive a change. I'll touch briefly on this as well, as time's ticking away, but a lot of our impacts in supply chain, so there needs to be a governance element within that too. And some of the things we put in place are kind of strengthening and reinforcing our supplier onboarding and ITT requirements, so invitation to tender, also containing mandatory elements such as how our supply chain are managing our emissions, how they're protecting the environment, and how they're doing their due diligence on bigger, larger kind of people-focused topics such as modern slavery. And then we invite them to get engaged through our kind of partnership with the Supply Chain Sustainability School, so upskilling their workforce and ensuring that they have the right knowledge and capabilities to be able to contribute towards the sustainability agenda. And then more recently, and that's the little kind of dancing around GIF on the right of the image, invited our priority suppliers, so those suppliers with high impact from a carbon perspective, to submit their carbon data on a regular basis, so we can understand our true kind of scope 3 impacts. So that's the image on the right. So I think that kind of eases us into the disclosure section as well. Again, using the same format, what is it and why does it matter? And it's another key element within the ESG, or within ESG. And in a sentence, disclosure is essentially reporting by an organization about performance across the whole the spectrum of ESG, so environmental, social, and governance. And disclosure helps stakeholders, whether that's investors, employees, or prospective or existing clients, understand how your company is managing both risks and opportunity in a structured and agreed manner. So it's probably obvious now, but I think everyone will agree it's more vital than ever for businesses, especially large and high impact businesses such as Bouygues, to be transparent about impacts and ESG performance. The more transparent the business is about sustainability topics, the higher accountability they have towards it, especially if it's in the public domain, easier to work against. As I mentioned at the start as well, the regulatory landscape is evolving and maturing. And I mentioned some of these about SECR, PPN 0621, putting a requirement for businesses that fall within the thresholds to publish this data, whether that's in annual director's report or on its website. It also informs the direction of key strategic areas. So if you can successfully capture, analyze, and disclose your information, that should inform your strategy as well. So you'll know as a business where you need to focus on, where you need to perhaps pay more attention to. And again, a growing area, employees' expectations. So employees want their company to be open and accountable. And that helps with attracting talent and retaining talent as well. And on a slightly kind of more positive note as well, it's also providing commercial benefits as well. We're seeing that feature in bids and tenders, and the weighting of that is slowly increasing as well. So on to the challenges as well. So it relies on being able to collect, verify, harvest your data and communicate that with accuracy and to be on time about it as well. So that's probably a challenge for all business, especially if you're having to rely on other people for it. Scores of reporting frameworks to choose from as well. There's no one size fits all approach, especially if you're in a complex business like ours. It's trying to kind of fit it all in and make it effective, and ensuring the target audience has a visibility of your disclosures as well. It's no point doing all of this work, all of this kind of, putting all these things in place if no one knows what you're doing as well. And then kind of finally on that as well is requires skill sets to be able to obtain and interpret data correctly. I can think of, the best example of that is carbon data. Although, it's relatively straightforward to do, you have to have kind of a rough skill set to be able to do that with accuracy and to be able to communicate that. So just finally on some of the things that we've done, on some of the measures that we put in place around disclosure and reporting. Apologies, again, it's slightly on the wordy side, but that's enhancing our disclosure through internal and external reporting. So again, keep mentioning SECR, Task Force Climate Related Financial Disclosures, and also reporting under the CDP at group level as well. So that gives our investors kind of assurances that we are being open and transparent, and it's verified and audited as well. Publication of our annual sustainability report, so that's kind of grown and evolved over the years. Internal and external newsletters, so updating our colleagues and our clients, so all of our stakeholders, to what's happening in the business, what we're doing well, but also what else we need to be doing better as well. Digitalization of sustainability data, so ensuring that we've got regular data coming in that's accurate, and then internal or from an FM specific requirement, requiring all of our FM contracts to be submitting sustainability data on a monthly basis. So looking at the full spectrum of sustainability then, so environmental data, social data, and economic data as well. And then measures such as supply chain analysis, but at an FM contract level, looking at emissions impacts perhaps for FM contracts in particular, so we can address any kind of high areas. So now kind of the final slide, and hopefully just trying to bring it all together. Just to summarize, I think having an effective governance structure will drive sustainability in your FM organization and up and down the value chain. So up towards your clients, so you can influence your clients, but down towards your suppliers as well. Governance must be inclusive, and its positive impact or its impacts should reach frontline employees as well. Governance is the driving force behind the other two pillars of sustainability that I drove home at the start. So without governance, we won't have a successful two pillars, the environmental and social pillars. Aligning to sustainability frameworks will allow you to identify and manage the core elements of your business impacts. And as I say, if you're just getting started or considering the SDGs are a good point. Understanding disclosure requirements as well is vital when considering your data collection. So you don't have to put in processes for all of, capturing everything around your business. So understanding where your legal obligations are, for instance, and working back from then to put the requirements, to put in the necessary measures. And then finally, digitalizing your sustainability data will kind of ensure and help you align with those regulations. So that's in a bit of a nutshell. So hopefully, well, that's me done. So back over to you, Chris and Sophie.
Cool, fantastic. Thank you very much for that. That was a really good kind of insight into the kind of governance and disclosure side of things. I just reshare my screen. And then we can go on to the Q&A section. So we've had a few questions coming in. So if I kind of start off with, okay, so if we start off with organizations who are kind of new to their sustainability journey, and especially kind of starting a governance journey as well, what would you say your kind of top 3 recommendations would be for those new FM providers to tackle first on their journey?
I think about it, first of all, is about understanding your impact as well. So every business is different. So if you've got, say, a large construction company, you need to know your impacts, and that will influence your governance. So I'd say my first tip is to understand your impacts. Second tip is to communicate those impacts with your senior leadership team. As I mentioned, it comes from the top down. So being able to communicate those impacts up, have the buy-in of your senior leadership team is important. And then thirdly, I'd look at engaging with, if you're reporting into, say, a tier 1 contract, for instance, understand what their requirements are around governance, because we as Boyd, we kind of have a rough idea, but if they're an important client to you, they may be able to give you some kind of just rough tips and ideas to help you kind of get started, if that answers your question.
Yeah, okay. And what about if the FM impacts are kind of smaller, because obviously the corporate level impacts are going to be much larger. So how would you?
So small impacts around governance.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose are you talking about engaging with your colleagues on this?
Yeah, so obviously the FM is going to be generally a lot smaller than your larger corporate impacts. So kind of so for example, construction impacts versus FM impacts.
Yeah, so I mean FM still will have an impact, won't it, in terms of but compared to a larger construction company or a larger construction arm, it may not be as big. But I'd still say it's just understanding what the impacts are, understanding, even if it is FM, you'll still have places, hotspots where you have to address.
Mm-hmm. Okay, cool, brilliant. Okay, so moving on to the next question. So you talked a bit about your kind of sustainability report and obviously the different types of disclosure that you do within the organisation. So what's your forward plan for developing the sustainability reporting kind of within Boyd?
Yeah, so it's a good question. So as I say, it's been on a bit of a journey, our sustainability reporting. It went from like a one-pager at the end of the year, just summarising the key points or key things that we've achieved in the year, to kind of where it is today, which is a kind of all singing, all dancing report that looks at the whole spectrum of environment, from HR, people management, to everything in between, including economic data. But the next step for us is to align to a framework, essentially. So we've got all of the content now, but in order to take it to the next level, it needs to be aligned with one of the reporting frameworks. So we're doing some market research at the moment, understanding which framework is best for us, essentially. So as I mentioned, we report up to the CDP, so Carbon Disclosure Project, and they've had recently done a memorandum of understanding with GRI, so Global Reporting Initiative. So it's likely that we'll be reporting to that, just because it makes sense. We don't have to kind of double up in terms of 2 different types of submissions in at the end of the year. So that will be the next step. But as I say, it's not an overnight process. There's a lot of things that you have to do within that. Make sure the data's in the right format. Make sure it's in the time brackets, etc. And that's getting supported by that. So that's the next step. So
yeah, absolutely. Okay, that sounds good. And we'll just finish with one final question, just because we're slowly starting to run out of time. So could you talk about what the impact has been, or the input, from the FM side of the business on the TCFD reporting at the group level?
What it's done for, I didn't catch that last bit, Sophie, sorry.
What's the input from the FM side of the business been on the TCFD reporting at the group level?
So that's made the FM side of the business kind of sit up in their seat, I suppose. So for the first time, they'll have to consider the kind of metrics that are required to be reported under the TCFD. So it's had a positive impact, because that's allowed us to make the business case to be able to put processes in place to capture data in the way that it needs to be captured and communicated. So it's had a positive kind of impact in that sense. And it's the same as the kind of SECR element as well, knowing that it has to be accurate data, financial related data, has had a real positive impact on the kind of management within FM as well, because they're having to consider that as a kind of key priority.
Okay, cool, fantastic. Thank you very much. So I think I'm going to tie up the kind of Q&A section there. So if anyone has any kind of further questions that they didn't get to be answered today, or think of kind of after the webinar, feel free to ping them across to us, and we'll communicate those across to Lewis and get some more answers out to you. So if I then just move on to the kind of next steps for the SFMI, just to kind of round this up. So after this, we will upload the recording for today's webinar on our YouTube channel, and we'll send out a link for that to all of you, so you can watch it again and send it to any of your other contacts and maybe colleagues. We are currently in the process of updating our 23 criteria report following our recent leaders forum, which we talked through the updates for this year's scoring methodology. We also recently launched our Scope 3 in FM standard, so the report is now ready to read on our website, so you can find it there. And next up, we will be starting to kick off our desktop assessments for the annual report, for the annual assessment process, kind of as of the end of this month and going into July. So that will be our desktop assessment. And then following up, we are currently in the process of booking all of your organisations in for their audits in September and October. So if you haven't already booked that in, do expect to be receiving some follow-up emails in the next few days, just to get you booked in. So that's everything kind of from our side. Is there anything else that you wanted to add on, Lewis, just to round up?
I think just to circle back to the question, I think I misunderstood it about the FM question. I've got another go at answering that before we kind of summarise. So just a tip on what you can do around governments if you're a small organisation. As I said, learning the impact is vital, but you don't have to go and put in massive governance kind of structures within the business. I think having a key sustainability champion or someone who's responsible within your business for environment and sustainability impacts is a good start, and then leaning on your people that you supply to too for gaining knowledge and kind of guidance on that element. So yeah, so just to readdress that before signing off.
Cool, brilliant. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Cool. And I think that's everything from us. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today. And like I mentioned, we will be following up with this on the YouTube channel, so you can watch the recording shortly.
Yes, thanks. Bye.